so I can. Thank you.
All yours now.
If I can just be able to share my screen, that would be great. So welcome everybody, it's lovely to see you. Just a little bit about me and my safeguarding background is I work in a special school, and I'm a deputy DSL in the school, and I've also been a foster carer. So I have got a special guardianship on 2 children who came to me when they were 4 and 6 for safeguarding reasons, and now they're 13 and 15. And there's still a lot of issues around them to do with safeguarding, as you can imagine, if they've come out of the care system. And in my special school that we work in with a lot of vulnerable children who have EHCPs, so emotional health care plans, and mental health issues. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is the importance of safeguarding and how that is important for early years, because we're all duty bound in our statutory way to look after the children in our care. All right, so I'm just going to start sharing my screen. If you have any questions, then we're going to do those at the end. And I know Yvonne is going to talk about some of the differences in terms of recruiting and safer recruiting. And I'm going to give you a bit of a 20-minute whistle-stop tour about safeguarding children in general. All right, so let's kick off. All right, so safeguarding in today, we're going to look about it's at the heart of what we do. All right, it's really important, and it's above everything. So safeguarding, if you're not keeping the children safe in your centre, then you're not doing your job properly. All right, safeguarding is about the first thing that we need to make sure that we've got right in our centres and in our settings. We're going to talk about the 4 main types of abuse, some specific safeguarding issues that you need to be aware of in early years, and also in the settings that you have with some of the other staff that you've got in your setting, and some additional safeguarding risks pertinent to the current situation that we're in. We've had COVID. We've got mental health issues coming out now, and these are all safeguarding issues that you need to be aware of, and how you can act in a child's best interest. So it's not going to be a session on, you've got to recognise all these different types of abuse and what to do, because that would take another 3 hours, but it's going to be an overview. Okay, so the 4 main elements of safeguarding are we're protecting children from maltreatment. We're making sure that they can come to us and they can learn, because if you're aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a triangle, and at the bottom it's being safe and secure, and everything else that we're trying to do with our children is on top of that. So they're not going to be able to learn to read, they're not going to be able to have conversations, they're not going to be able to do anything if they're feeling anxious or insecure or unsafe, or if they're being abused. So it really is the fundamental. It's about preventing the impairment of their physical and mental health, all right, because abuse causes a lot of trauma in children, and the children that I have in my school are coming out the other side of it, and it can affect them for their whole life. So early years is really key. We have to get it right in early years, because it can prevent a lot of things going forward. We need to make sure that our children are growing up and they're consistent with provision of safe and effective care, all right? And we need to be able to take action to make sure that they have the best outcomes, all right? So unfortunately, there are a lot of children which are still being abused, which you might not know about in your setting, but it might come to light in different areas with different people, but it does affect them forever, and they do have trauma-related illnesses going forward. They might have anxieties, they might have depression, and ultimately some people who have been abused actually become abusers themselves. So it's about stopping that cycle. It's about stopping it as soon as we can, and that's the job that we have in early years, to do that. That's our responsibility. Okay, so keeping children safe in education, all right, is the key document that all educational settings, including your early years, needs to know. And you need to have read that, and in your settings, you need to make sure that you're implementing all the things within your setting to make sure that those children are safe in your setting. I'm not going to go too much into recruitment, because I know Yvonne's going to talk about that and literally the practical things that you need to do. But some of the things that the Keeping Children Safe in Education document, which is published by the government every September, changes every year. And so it's no good for you to just, read it one year and say, that's great, we've ticked that box, we can prove that to Ofsted. Because next year there's something else, and safeguarding is continually growing, as you'll know. So we need to keep up to speed with a lot of things, and you need to make sure that you and your staff, you are keeping your staff up to speed with all the things in the Keeping Children Safe in Education. So online things this year is quite big, online and offline. Everybody's been on Zoom, everybody's been at home. Lots of children have had more time at home, on computers, on video games, on whatever it is. And so online abuse is growing, and it's becoming a big issue. So we need to be aware of that, and you need to make sure your settings have effective filters in place on your systems, that you're doing, that you're not, inadvertently, when you're showing something on a video or a television, you need to make sure that the videos and they're all filtered so they're appropriate, especially for early years. Especially if you're using things like YouTube, you just need to be aware of that. Okay, you need to be aware of the added vulnerability of some children in your setting. All right, in the Keeping Children Safe in Education, these are changes this year to make sure that people are aware that people who have health conditions or SEND needs, they are more vulnerable. They may not be able to communicate properly some of the things that are happening to them, and they might not be able to use words. And in early years, a lot of our children, they don't have the language skills in early years to be able to say what's going on with them. So you need to be aware that they communicate in other ways, and the most often way that they communicate is with behaviour. All right, so we call it challenging behaviour, and a lot of us, in the past, we call it, sometimes they'd just be labelled as naughty, or that's the naughty child, and we don't do that anymore, thank goodness. But we are now understanding that actually these behaviours that people are coming out with is because they don't feel safe. They don't feel happy. They haven't got those needs met. They're not feeling secure. They're anxious all the time. And that's what's coming out in their behaviour. So when we start to understand that with our children, we start to get a real insight into how we can help them. Because if you're continually telling me, stop doing that, that's, you're being naughty and we're going to put you on, over here, or we're going to take time out, and you don't take the time to say to them, are you okay? Is something the matter? Then we're not doing our job properly. We need to be able to understand our children at a really early age and understand that their behaviour is them trying to communicate something to us. So some of these things on the screen here are things to be aware of if you've got children in your setting with mental health needs, members in prison, honour-based abuse or FGM, or people who are consistently absent from your setting or from a school, or their children, these are more vulnerable children that you need to be more aware of in your setting. The key thing this year is that abuse can happen between children, even in early years, all right? And anti-bullying and anti-sexual harassment is really big this year, right? The government are trying to really boost our understanding of it to help us tackle it. And in early years, if we, as you all know, I know you know this, if we don't get it right in early years, it just filters through and the problem becomes bigger. And I'll talk a bit about that later as well. And, we need to be aware that sadly, child abduction and community safety incidents are becoming more, even for people who are grown-ups, as have been in the news recently, sadly, these things do happen. And I think when talking about safeguarding, sometimes we think, oh, well, it wouldn't happen near me, it wouldn't happen here. It happened in my children's school with people who were trusted, and it happens everywhere. So we all need to be aware that these things do happen. They're not nice. We don't like to talk about them, but we need to talk about them to keep our children safe. So on that point, if you have any concerns about sexual violence or harassment, or a child reports an incident to you, or you think the child is in immediate danger, you must take it seriously and you must act immediately and go to your DSLs. Okay, so You must always assume it can happen here. This is in England. Okay, so for every one child in England that we know about, there are another 8 which we think are not getting the help that they need. And when I first heard this statistic, I was shocked by this. I thought that's an amazing number, and I was doing a training and I said, what do you think? And people said, oh, maybe 3 or 4. But when you think about this, 8 children who are out there who are actually suffering unnecessarily because we haven't picked up on that, it's actually quite a shocking statistic. So we do need to be doing something. And an online offence against a child every 16 minutes. So in the course of this webinar, that's, 5 or 6 children who have been exposed to inappropriate content. And I think it's probably much more than that. If you have teenagers or people who use TikTok or different videos, it's really hard to keep them safe now. They're ahead of the game. They use computers much better than we do. They know all the things. And my children come in to me and go, Mummy, you just need to do this, this, and this. And I'm going, hang on. But they're growing up with it. If you're of my generation, you kind of learned to use technology. Our children now are using it from sometimes when they're, the first 6 months, they're given visually stimulating things on technology, and they know how to use it. So we as adults need to be aware of that. We really, really, really need to be observing what they're doing, checking what they're doing, and making sure that they are safe online. Okay, so who has the responsibility for safeguarding children? Is it the practitioner? Is it the caretaker? Is it the midday supervisor? Is it the owner? Is it the person in the street? Is it the person next door to you? Everybody has a little piece of the jigsaw, but really, to get the full picture, we need to put everything together. So some of the serious case reviews that have happened in the past with various people is because that one person had this piece of information, one person had this little bit, but they never, sorry, my butt is just running away. That's plugged in, I apologise. Okay. Apologies for that. So the picture, we need to get everybody involved because they've all got their little piece. And if we know that the caretaker says, well, actually, that child gets picked up by somebody different virtually every day, that's a little piece of the jigsaw. If the practitioner says, well, actually, they keep coming in and they've got bruises and they can't really tell me how they've got those, or your midday supervisor is saying, well, they're never eating. I never see that child eat. It's a little piece of the picture. And by putting all that data together, we get the full picture, and we've got a much better chance of actually helping that child in the future. Okay, so the way the safeguarding works in terms of reporting and getting information through to the people who really need it, who can offer help, we have what we call now safeguarding partnerships. So there's 3 people involved. There's the local authority, your local safeguarding police partner, and the health commissioning partner, which is all your NHS services, your doctors and things like that. And then within your own setting, you're going to have a designated safeguarding lead. Every setting must have a DSL. They have to be trained in what they're doing to understand what the risks are. And you might have a deputy DSL, which is what I am, so who can assist. And if the DSL is not there, you need to make sure that there's always somebody that safeguarding issues can be brought to, because if there are urgent cases, they have to be acted on immediately. Not everybody is an urgent case. It might be a case of we've got to just check this out. And what I say to our teachers when you're training your practitioners and you're training the people in your setting, it's not about making them investigate anything. They don't have to investigate. Their job is to pass it on, to notice, to pass it on. So in your training, sometimes people get really scared about safeguarding. And if you do your training well and you reiterate to them that they really have to pass the information on, then you'll find that after your training, you'll get a flood of safeguarding issues where people say, well, Johnny came in and he didn't have a cardigan, and Bobby came in, she didn't have any socks on, or whatever it is. And then you can, that's the job of the DSL to work with the parents, or to say, well, ask what's going on. So it's not all that everybody's being abused all the time, but at least if you're passing that information on, people have the chance to ask questions. So you might have some DSLs or some input from your mental health leads. Maybe you've got a mental health lead in your setting who's looking after your staff and your children's mental health. You might have some community healthcare professionals who come in. You might have some teachers if you're in a setting which is in a school. You might have some teachers coming through as well. And then you've got the local area designated officer, which is the person who, if there are concerns about people who are working with children, say in a school or a setting, they're the person to go to if you have concerns. They're the laddo there. So it's a whole range of people looking after the child, and within your own setting, you'll have your key worker, and you'll have your, you might have some apprentices, or you've got all the different people within your setting who are responsible as well in terms of looking out for safeguarding issues. So let's talk about the 4 main types of abuse. You've got physical abuse. Okay, so children are being actually physically abused, hit or burnt or dropped or shaken. Emotional abuse. They might be seeing parents arguing all the time. Emotional abuse can take many forms. It can be a parent saying to them, oh, you're always, why are you always bad at this? Or, you can't do this very well. Or your sister's always doing really well and you're not, something like that. But over time, this kind of emotional abuse has an impact on the child. Sexual abuse, well, that's anything inappropriate with children. And actually, if you have peers who are under 16, it's legally classed as sexual abuse because it's a peer, and a child under 16. So there are some grey lines there, but the idea that any adult is sexually abusing people is abhorrent, and we need to be aware of that. And then there's neglect. Most of the cases of children going into care these days is due to neglect. And that's about the parents may be unable to look after their child. They might be sick. They might have a mental health condition themselves. They might be have dependencies on substances or alcohol, and they might just not be putting the child first, which is neglecting them. But it has a knock-on effect all the way through their life. So when you do your safeguarding training, you will go into detail of all these different types of abuse and what to look out for, and what the students and your trainees and your teachers and your practitioners need to be looking out for. And that would take quite a long time. But there are some common behaviours to look for, which is about changing behaviours when the children are being abused. What we most often find is that there's a change in their behaviour. So they might have difficulty concentrating and they might not be doing well at school. They might become withdrawn. They might have some mood or behaviour changes. They might have tiredness. They might have some mental health needs. They might be displaying anxiety or depression. They might be self-harming. That doesn't have to be, cutting your arm. It could be punching a wall continuously with your wrist, or banging your heads on tables and things like that. They might have risk-taking behaviour, doing things that you wouldn't expect at that particular age. And they might be, with older children, often taking drugs or alcohol. So those are sort of common behavioural signs to look for. And then under all of the different types of abuse, you might get any or all of some of these different types of behaviours as well. So there might be signs of malnutrition, issues with language development, fractures, bruises, lacking of social skills. Now, what we have in early years is, because of the age of the children that we're dealing with, some of them you're going, well, actually, the child does have difficulty sitting. Does that mean they've been a victim of FGM, or does that mean they've got Asperger's, or they can't sit still, or they have an anxiety about sitting down? It's difficult for early years practitioners sometimes to navigate around this, and it can be, you can sometimes say, well, they've got a language development problem, but that might be nothing to do with them being abused or a safeguarding issue. It just might be to do with the child. So we need to, pick through these things very carefully and understand that every child's going to be different, and we need to understand the holistic area around that child so that we can make good safeguarding calls. For example, if you've got a fear of a particular person, you know, it's not necessarily all that means that that person's been abused by a person who looks like that. It might just be that in a story they've read somewhere that you know, they're imagining a person of that particular description, and therefore to the child they've read the story, and then somebody walks in the room like that and they become scared of that child because they're relating it back to a story they've heard. So it's difficult, but we need to make the effort, and that's why referring onto the DSLs in your setting is the right thing to do, because then they can have those conversations, and then it can come out that the child, oh, we read that book last night, or we saw that particular thing and that scared them, and then we can, you know, start to put the full picture together and decide whether it's a safeguarding issue or not. Okay, so I said this earlier, but it's not about being a detective in your setting. It's not about getting everybody in your setting to go, well, they came in and they did this, so we've got to ask them this and ask them this and do this, and then we'll work out who the you know, it's not Cluedo. It's about noticing changes and passing this information on to the right people. So a lot of people get concerned about that, and they worry that if somebody says something to them or comes in and they've got a bruise that they have to go, so how did you get that? And they worry about the questions. And that's a whole other training session of how to deal with people who do come in with bruises or different things. But the main thing to get on board is that your DSLs are properly trained and that they know what to do, and that the people in your setting are properly trained and that they know who to pass things on to. And it's always better to pass it on and not. You'd rather have 3,000 things that you go, actually, that's not an abusive situation, than miss the one that is. Okay, so some of the safeguarding issues, you know, I said earlier that safeguarding in the keeping children safe in education is a growing issue, and all of these other safeguarding issues you need to be aware of in your settings, because it's about, any of these things could come up. Bullying, child abduction, domestic abuse, drugs, and there's more information in the Keeping Children Safe in Education document, but you need to be aware of them. And like I said, you could do a whole training session on each and every one of these. But they're things which are coming up and being more aware of now in the settings. Okay, mental health. This is a really key thing now in safeguarding. All right, it was specifically added to the document in 2020. But the pandemic, what we're looking at now, and what I know that you were seeing in your settings, is children have been affected a lot. You know, they've been coming to early years now, and they haven't had all the interactions with adults, and they haven't had all the interactions with their peers that they might have had in the past. And so they might be socially anxious, or they might have different areas that are coming out in mental health things. They might be scared of going to lots of people. Even lots of adults now are more cautious about going and speaking to other people. In an average class of 30 pupils, 5 of them will have a clinically diagnosable mental health disorder, which is quite a large number. I think when you think about this in terms of the people that you're seeing coming through your doors, we need to be aware that there will be people who have anxiety, who have depression, who have mental health issues or going on, which we need to be aware of and we need to tackle. Can be a sign that some child is suffering from mental health or from abuse, but it could be that that's just they're anxious about various other things, and that's where your DSL's skills will come into the fore to give you guidance about what you need to do with that particular child. And sadly, suicide is on the increase in young people, and it's a big thing that we should be being aware of. And quite a lot with this safeguarding of children is about keeping them safe, and then child protection is about protecting the children who we know have and we've identified as being at risk of abuse, and protecting them from various different things. And one of those things is suicide. Okay, I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to whiz through some of these things. It's not just children in early years that need safeguarding. All right, so safeguarding applies to children under the age of 18, and you may have apprentices who are joining in that ed. You may have people in your setting who are older than that, who are, you know, having severe domestic abuse at home. It's you know, although safeguarding is about under 18s, but you might have a duty of care to your staff if you realise to offer them some help on issues if their domestic abuse or domestic violence is an issue. And domestic abuse and domestic violence and violence against women in particular is really big in the headlines now. It's been in the news, it's coming to the forefront, whereas in the past it was probably pushed under the carpet or, you know, seen as, oh, well, that's, you know, that's okay, but it's not. And we need to be very firm that it's not okay, and we need to stop it. And if we can stop it in early years, we can stop that spiral downwards. Adults who may have special needs also come under safeguarding. So if you have adults in your care or people who you've employed who are still maybe have some mental health needs themselves, you have a duty to safeguard those as well. There may be other issues with some of these other things, which are those other parts on the Keeping Children Safe in Education, you know, the child sexual exploitation, which is the CSE, the child criminal exploitation, which is the CCE, peer-on-peer abuse, and sexual harassment. So we need to be, it's a lot to look out for. Online, we talked briefly about online dangers earlier on, but online is a really big thing that you need to make sure you're doing really well in your setting. Some of these smaller problems feed into bigger problems. You might not be able to see this very well, but at the bottom we've got here gender stereotypes, sexist jokes, sexist language, different expectation of boys and girls based on gender. And at the top we've got FGM, rape and murder. And it's a big pyramid that feeds into from one to the other. So if we're not challenging the gender stereotyping at the bottom, what might we see? We might not expect, you know, we might boys to show emotion. We might be saying, well, you know, in the past, well, boys don't cry, you know, come on, boys don't cry, that's okay. But what are we teaching the children when we say that? We might have different expectations, and it might be a subtle thing that we say about, you know, well, your dad will do this and your mum will do that, or your carer will do this, your male carer, or something like that. Gender stereotypes, expectations from the heroes and stories, and some of the stories that we're telling, you know, we all now look at the Cinderella story and we go, we can tell the Cinderella story, but we might now have to put some context around that and say, do we really want to suggest that every girl needs to wait for her prince to come and rescue her? Perhaps not. Or that the only thing we can do is that the boys can, you know, they're the heroes and they can fight off the villains. We just need to be aware of this, you know. And are we allowing sexist banter to go unchallenged? Because if we don't, as you filter up into the secondary school things, this is what we get. And so we get flicking bar straps, lifting up skirts. Well, it's okay, it's just boys being boys, it's just banter, but it's not. And at the top, we've got the other things as well. So there's some ideas about how to challenge sexist banter, because sexism and sexual harassment is really big, as I said, this year. You know, challenge it there and then. Challenge the behaviour, not the person. It's not the person who's sexist, it's what they say or the behaviour they're displaying, which is sexist or racist or abusive. Explaining what the problem is, supporting, challenging gender stereotypes, and focusing on the perpetrator's behaviour rather than the victims. You know, it's not that the girl wore a short skirt, that it's the fact that the perpetrator decided to lift her skirt up. That's the problem. Some of these things are more difficult in early years, but it might be your staff that are putting some of these things on the children. And the question we have to ask is, what does the child learn if you don't challenge these behaviours? You know, they learn that it's okay. It's okay to be a little bit sexist or a little bit racist, but that little bit becomes a lot. There's some, I know you're all going to get this presentation, so here's some ways to start conversations if you do need to challenge people in your setting. You know, what do you think that word means? If you know, even with children, with younger children, they might have heard things at home. So challenge them, you know, do you really understand the word that you're using there? Shall we explore that? You know, you might not have meant to cause harm, but actually this child is really upset by what you've said or what you've done. So this peer-on-peer abuse we need to tackle. I'm really way off time now, but so here are some of the key things about the importance of safeguarding. It is about making children grow up safe and happy. Always think it could happen here. We all have a role to play in safeguarding children, and your safeguarding team are there to listen to your concerns, and they will not tell you off for coming off, for bringing the concerns to them. That's their job. You need to be aware of what the guidance means to you, and you need to keep up to date with that every year. Remember that safeguarding has a really wide remit, all right? So it's not just the children, it could be the people working for you, it could be some of your apprentices. And really key, if a child is in immediate danger, you need to call 999. You cannot wait. You need to safeguard that child and keep them and protect them. Okay, so I've put on at the end of the PowerPoint some sources of support for different things, and there's lots of information there about sources of new information, which I hope you can take on board and use within your setting. There's lots of things, but the thing is, safeguarding is the #1 thing that we have to do with our children. Everything else comes after that. And that's me finished. Thank you very much.
Gail, that was so informative and so useful. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. It was really, really harrowing at times, but also so useful for us all. There's a couple of points that I took personally, which I thought were staggering. The first was your 1-to-8 child suffering ratio. That number blew me away. And then the second one was that there's one online offence against a child every 16 minutes.
Yeah.
And again, I find those statistics just horrific, as I'm sure everybody else does, but I think it's the magnitude. And I don't think most of us are aware that the frequencies or the numbers of the magnitude that you've suggested. Just quite horrific. Okay, I have got lots of questions for you, Gail, coming in on my screen. So forgive me, I'm just going to rattle through them if I can. The first one, Gail, is how often do you do a refresher course for your staff on safeguarding?
Okay. Well, we do, legally you have to do one every year when the new items come out, but we regularly do updated training. So all of the people in our school, in fact, a lot of them are trained as DSLs themselves. All of our SMT are trained as DSLs, and we get all of our other staff to train regularly on online courses. Doesn't have to be face-to-face courses, but it does need to be regularly. And we issue a newsletter every month, so people are regularly reminded. It can be a sort of a 3-minute, 5-minute read, but something just to remind yourself of this particular thing. So regularly, I would say, but officially once every year, but regularly is better. It's better practice.
Okay, so you've just been talking about DSLs, and that actually is the next question that's come up. And the question asks, does even a small setting need to have a DSL?
Yes, even a childminder has to act as their DSL. So they're doing that. If you're a childminder in a setting, you've got 3 people, you're acting as your own DSL in terms of that. It can get a bit careful because you've got to have whistle in settings. You need to have whistleblowing policies, and in our setting, if people have a complaint against the head teacher or the SMT, then they have to have people to go to an advisory board or a governing board or even the LADO. But there's always people that you can go to have concerns aired. And sometimes people will, with a grievance, it can scare people because you can get a safeguarding call and that person's just having a grievance against me for this, and it can scare a lot of people, which is where your record keeping comes in terms. The fact that you can show your training, your record keeping, that all your safe practices, not being shut away in a room on your own with all of those. There's such a lot, in that you can't cover in the space of this seminar. It's got to be. You really have to make sure that you've got a handle on your practices.
Okay, that's really interesting. You're leading me brilliantly to the next set of questions. So everybody's going to think this is pre-prepared, and I can assure you it isn't. But the question that came in next is it a good idea for the DSL not to be the manager or the principal of the school?
I think it depends on your own setting. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. if you've got a small setting and the manager who knows everybody and knows the parents really well, they will have a lot more information about the child's background, what we call contextual safeguarding, which is knowing where the child comes from, all the issue around the child that you might not want to share with all your team on a confidentiality basis. So it really depends. I think it's not right to say it's yes or no to that one. It depends on the setting that you want. Also depends on the workload that you've got. If your manager or your owner is doing a lot of different things and lots of different hats on, they might want to delegate the DSL role. But why not have one or two? And then you can cover lots of bases. I mean, we in our school have, like I said, a lot, because we have a lot of issues and we have a lot of time, and if one person's dealing with one student, we need someone to be able to deal with another, so we have a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you talked a minute ago about how you record information. I've got a question here which is asking the best way to record the information, and do you have any specific templates that you use for recording it?
Well, we use a system called My Concern, which is an online-based system, and there's lots of other online-based systems which people can use. You can use you need to record it. That's fundamental. You need to record it and keep a written record of it, and a confidential written record of it, because you need to pass safeguarding things on to the next school and various things like that. And then when you pass it on to the next school, you have to delete them from your computers as well. So there are different computer-based systems out there. Like I said, we use My Concern, but if a child's saying something to you, the worst thing you can do is go, oh, hang on a minute, I know you're going to tell me about this, but let me get my pen out, and what did you say again? You can't record it in that moment, because they're likely to go, actually no. But you need to listen. You need to become active listeners, and you need to record it as soon as you can afterwards on a piece of paper or whatever it is. That's about disclosures, which is a slightly specific part of safeguarding. But if a child comes in and you notice every day that they don't have, all their clothes are a bit dirty and they don't have any socks on, and they're, it might just be a poverty thing. That's where it becomes difficult. But pass it on so that whoever is the DSL in your setting can have that conversation with the parent, and you say, actually, this parent's just struggling and they're in poverty, and but we'll just get there are people around them. People are sometimes scared about calling in the social services because of what that can ultimately mean, but there's a lot of support that the social services put in before going a child in care situation to help that child stay where they are. So it's okay to get those people involved, because there are family support workers, there's people that go out and put a team around the child, whatever they need. And that's the thing, find out what the child needs and put that support in.
Okay, good. So I've got a question from Kath here, and she's asking, are other organisations like partner schools obliged to share information about a child, and vice versa? Can we request from other people about what's going on with a child in jeopardy? I'm not sure which other organisations you mean. I think there's a confidentiality issue within the schools, but within a formal education setting, I know that when people go from primary school to secondary school, you have to pass their safeguarding information on. I don't know, to be honest, the legalities of requesting the safeguarding information. We would, as our school, have a duty to get that information from the other people, and we'd ask for the Senko information and everything like that as well. And I'm not sure what the context of the question really is. If say I'm a nursery and people move in, I would think that would be good practice to request safeguarding information, but I don't know about the legality of that, if it's a childminder and a let me answer that for you, get a second. The clarity's just come in. They're an out-of-school club within a school.
An extra school club within a school. Well, an
out-of-school club within a school.
An out-of-school club. I don't think that would be able to ask the school for confidential information about that child. But what they would be able to do is to feed back to their own DSL, who I would expect to feed back to the school's DSL, or the parents, or somebody within that safeguarding team that's around the child. But the thing is, it's not about, it's going back to that Miss Marple thing. You know, you don't have to be the detective. If you're running an after school club and you notice a child you have some safeguarding concerns, then you report it to your DSL, and your DSL would, I think, contact either the social services, and then they would take it from there, because there goes those three safeguarding partners. All right, it's the local authorities, it's the police, and it's the healthcare people. So you're kind of referring that to them, if that makes sense.
It does, it does. Okay, good. Gail, I'm going to wrap that up now because we're slightly running behind schedule. Thank you so much for your time today. That's been absolutely fascinating. I'm sure everybody on the call really does appreciate your time. They can't hear you, but we're all going to clap. Those people you can see anyway. And thanks again for your time. It's really appreciated. So we're going to move on. I'm going to invite Yvonne Sinclair to join us now. Yvonne is an award-winning independent safeguarding consultant and trained in child protection by the NSPCC. Yvonne, floor is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Gail, and the team at Parenta for inviting me in today to talk about safeguarding, and specifically safer recruitment. Thanks to you, Gail, for setting it up so lovely there and going through all the different areas of safeguarding. So let me show you what I am going to be talking about. Just bear with me. Let me make sure we're getting the right screen up there. Okay. There we go. Okay, so let me tell you what I'm going to be talking about today. First of all, my name is Yvonne Sinclair. I'm an independent safeguarding consultant here at Safeguarding Support Limited. A little bit about my background. I've been in safeguarding a long time, since 2006. And during that time, I built up and was a national safeguarding officer for a children's charity. I became independent in 2015, and since 2015, I have been working with early years providers, academy groups, maintain schools, and those that provide education to children. So, what is today about? Well, Gail has lovely set up the safeguarding, the overview of what safeguarding is. It's a really complex area, but I want to just focus specifically on the early years settings, because safeguarding is not just about what Gail was talking about there. She mentioned the different categories of abuse and the new areas of concern coming in, the online safety and the sexual violence and sexual harassment. So that kind of alludes you to safeguarding as a much bigger picture than a specific safeguarding concern. In fact, safeguarding covers a whole wide area of subjects. And what our guidance, our statutory guidance says is we have to safeguard children so that we can allow them to develop and learn, because you know in your setting, for some of the children in your setting, being in school is the safest place for them to be. And if they feel safe there, they will develop and learn and thrive. Safeguarding is about providing a culture of vigilance, promoting the welfare, and making sure that everybody within your setting understands what safeguarding is and what appropriate safeguarding action they need to take. We know for safeguarding, no one practitioner can safeguard a child. It's only when we all work together, and as Gail showed us earlier, all those little pieces of the jigsaw come together, can we truly safeguard that child. So we've got to think about our statutory guidance, our best practice guidance, our other responsibilities around that, and also, as Gail's just been talking about there, our professional judgment and moral judgment about keeping children safe in our setting. Now, we often talk about two things in safeguarding and child protection. The little pieces of the jigsaw, like Gail was just talking about, and every little piece of the jigsaw provided to your safeguarding team, put together, provides a bigger picture for us safeguarding leads to decide what is the best action for that child. But there's another analogy that we use here at Safeguarding Support, and it's our safeguarding umbrella. Because if you think about a safeguarding umbrella, it's overarching and it covers everything. And every little spoke of that umbrella covers a different aspect to safeguarding. Now, what you can see on the screen here is all my different spokes of my umbrella here. And I'm looking specifically here at early years. So we're talking about the health and safety of the children in our care, the well-being and mental health, as we saw, which came in 2020, September 2020. As Gail quite rightly put forward, those SEND children are highly vulnerable. In fact, they're 3 times more vulnerable than their peers. Then, of course, we've got children that require intimate care and first aid. Now, our children that require intimate care, for whatever reason, are highly vulnerable as well, because what we've got is a greater need for adults to have possibly one-to-one attention with those children. And again, all these different aspects, I won't go through all of them because I know we're running out of time, but what you can see at the end there, just below child protection, is the suitability of people in our care. And what we have to do is make sure that everybody working in our setting is suitable for working with those children. And all these areas on my safeguarding umbrella is coming from the updated Inspecting Safeguarding in Early Years. If you're not aware, this was updated on the 24th of August for the new academic year. So please make sure that you're referring to the latest guidance about your safeguarding responsibilities. And of course, if any of you are expecting Ofsted, this is what they will be inspecting you on throughout the safeguarding review. And remember, they will be looking at that online safety, and they will certainly be looking at that sexual violence and sexual harassment provision within your settings. So let's look at the suitability of the people in your care. What is our duty? What is best practice for us to do and make sure that they are suitable for working with the children? That we have to protect their welfare. So what it says is every setting has to provide that safe culture. As I've already alluded to, there's no one person that can safeguard a child. It's only when we all work together. So we have to have a whole setting approach. We have to make sure that everybody within that setting understands that we have to deter, identify, and reject any adult that isn't suitable for working with our children. And that's at every stage of recruitment, right from advertisement, right through to job offer. But it actually goes beyond that as well, because safer recruitment also incorporates your induction process. So we need to make sure that we're covering that in our safeguarding arrangements when we're looking at those. But the other thing that I've got there is those people that are not employed by you. So when I go around and do safeguarding audits for settings, I often see that there's really robust procedures in place for safer recruitment to ensure that everybody that the setting is recruiting is really safe to work with the children. But they haven't often got safer recruitment procedures in place for those other people that they don't employ. So I'm talking about maybe supply staff, agency staff, and please remember volunteers as well, because a volunteer has got the same access to your children in your setting, but they're just not getting paid. So throughout your safer recruitment, please make sure that you're encompassing all those different roles. But why is safer recruitment so important in safeguarding? Well, we've just talked about Ofsted there. And if you are a school setting and Ofsted comes into your school setting, the first thing that they would look at is your single central record. That's how important safeguarding is. Now, you could have leadership and development at outstanding levels, but if you have not recruited safely the people working with your children, Ofsted will certainly have a deeper dive into your policies and procedures. And we found that this has come back, it come through from many years. Back in the BSHI report back in 2004, what the findings of that report was that we needed major changes in the vetting procedures, including, as we've just been talking about, funnily enough, information sharing, and ensuring that we're setting up a national registration to ensure that we are recruiting and ensuring that the people working with the children are safe to do so. So we're talking about back in 2002, the CRB, and then of course in 2012, that converted to the DBS, disclosure and barring service. But there are other statutory checks that we need to do. Things like those disqualification under the Child Care Act 2006, specifically aimed at early years. And of course, in May 2018, we had a massive change in DPA, Data Protection Act, and GDPR, which all have an effect on how we can recruit people. No more so than at the moment. What I'm showing on the screen at the moment is all those red things have all changed in the last 12 months. So we've had a massive update in your DBS filtering guidance that was updated on the 28th of November. That is telling you how we need to recruit people and the changes in that Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, which will affect your application process, your self-disclosure forms and things like that. So we need to be thinking about that. Still on DBS, the ID checking guidance was updated on the 1st of July 2021. That guidance came in on the 1st of July 2021, but it actually became effective last Friday, the 1st of October 2021. So please make sure, going back to your settings, that you're using the most up-to-date guidance to do your DBS ID checking. And then down the right-hand side of the screen there, what we've got is, as Gail said, that Keeping Children Safe in Education 2021. That last year, in 2020, it was 110 pages long. In September 2021, it's now 160 odd pages long, which kind of tells you there's been a lot of updates in that document. If you haven't had the opportunity to read it yet, then I strongly recommend that you do. All you early years providers out there would know that the EYFS framework was updated in March, but it became effective on the 1st of September as well. And the safeguarding section of that is section 3 within that. Even though there isn't massive changes within section 3, there are some changes that you need to be aware of. So please, again, if you've not had a chance to read that, please look at that. Now, many of you on today, I believe, would be schools. So if you're a school, then there's some changes in your advice there. So you can see staffing and employment advice for schools was updated in January 2021. So again, please make sure you're looking at that document. Working together to safeguard children, even though it still says 2018, it was updated in December 2020. And that again does have an effect on safer recruitment. And of course, at the bottom one there, that Ofsted inspection, which came into effect on the 1st of September. So lots of changes that you may have to consider if you haven't already, in line with your recruitment and selection process. So why does this all matter? Well, you're all in early years, and therefore you will be aware of serious case reviews. A serious case review is what happens after the death or serious injury of a child. And what we do is we have a look, we review what went wrong, what failures were in there, and what can we change to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And there's numerous safe recruitment, serious case reviews that we can look at. But the one that I'm showing you on the screen here is the serious case review from the Nursery Z that came out in 2010. And the failures in that, of that early year's setting was they didn't have any professional organisation within that setting. They didn't have that safeguarding reflective practice that every setting needs to safeguard children. They weren't working together. They didn't have a whole setting approach. They didn't have those safer working practices in place or that code of conduct. So staff didn't know what behaviours they were expected to keep to. There was a lot of assumptions going on, assumptions about qualifications and capabilities that the staff, certainly the management staff, had because they'd been in that setting a long time, but nobody checked it. The policies and procedures were not up to date, and neither was their training. So even though staff did see failures in the setting, they didn't know what to do about it. They didn't know what whistleblowing was. They didn't know where they could go to, which is what Gail was talking about earlier. And of course, what this session is about, they did not have a robust or effective recruitment or selection process. They weren't following the current guidance at the time. So let's look at today's current guidance. What do we need to be doing? Well, we need to be doing recruitment checks, safer recruitment checks, which will involve criminal record checks, that enhanced DBS check. But please remember, anybody working directly with children unsupervised, they are in regulated activity and also need to be checked against the barred list. And that includes volunteers and those over the age of 16. So make sure that you're getting your DBS, your criminal record check, at the right level for the right people. We need to be doing those overseas checks. So if somebody has been out of the country, it depends on your policies, but usually rule of thumb is 3 months or more in the 5 years prior to recruitment. We need to be doing additional checks to make sure that they didn't do anything unsuitable outside the country that would make them unsuitable for working with children. And we also need to make sure that everybody working with children in your setting understand that they are expected to disclose any cautions, convictions, reprimands and warnings, including those that happened before employment in your setting and also during your setting. It's our responsibility to tell them what we need to know. And then I've just shown you those failures in the serious case review. Some of the failures were, there were people in position that didn't have the qualifications that they should have. There was an assumption that because they are older and more experienced, they must have those qualifications. It is our setting's responsibility to make sure that the people that are looking after our children are qualified to the right level. We need to make sure that we carry out identity checks, that they are the people who they are saying they are. And again, I've just shown you that there's been some changes to the DBS identity checks that became effective on the 1st of October. As an employer, we need to do right to work checks. And I'm going to show you the new document of the right to work checks from the Home Office, which I would recommend that you are using, that you should use in a minute. And references. References are so important because an appropriate reference, if we get a correct reference from a previous employer, should I say, and they are identifying that there's a theme of behaviour running through, their past behaviour could well give us an indicator of their future behaviour. So appropriate references are so important. And of course, we have to make sure that they aren't disqualified under that Child Care Act 2006. And if you are a domestic setting, remember, you have to do that declaration for anybody working or living in the house as well. School settings from 2018 no longer need to do that disqualification by association. So lots of checks going on in there. But Gail also alluded to the importance of record keeping. Safeguarding is so important But it's okay doing it, but we have to evidence that we've done it, what checks we carried out, what decisions have we come to, what are our justifications around those decisions. So record keeping and evidence is so important. So we need to keep records of those staff qualifications, checking that they have got the right qualifications at the right level, and we need to be keeping copies of those so that we can evidence we've carried out that check. In a school setting, these things would be recorded on your single central record. But in the early year settings, you don't necessarily need to have that massive document, that single central record, but you must still have a record of all the checks you've carried out and the evidence that you've obtained. We need to be checking those that identity. And again, when I'm auditing, I'm finding that people are not doing the right ID checks. When we are checking out somebody's identity, we need 3 different pieces of evidence. We need a document that evidences their name and photo ID if possible. So that could be your passport. We need a document that evidences their date of birth. It can't be the passport. The passport is being used for the name. So you need a different document for the date of birth. And that could be your driving license, their driving license, should I say. And the third piece of evidence would be their address. So you need maybe a utility bill or an official bank statement, not one that's been downloaded. So please remember, we need to make sure that we're getting those identity checks done correctly. We have to carry out all our vetting processes, and we need to record these. Now, if we've done a DBS certificate, we need to make sure that we're recording the reference number, that long number that's on the certificate. We need to be recording the date a check was obtained, however you do that. And of course, the name of the organisation that did it, who carried out that check. So for every vetting check, we need 3 things. We need who carried out the check, what the check was, and the date that check was carried out. If we're concerned about the suitability of anybody working in school towards a child, then remember we've got a statutory duty under the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act to take action. So make sure that all DSL senior leaders are aware of that and make sure it's in your policies because it is a statutory requirement. And of course, going back to my safeguarding umbrella, health and safety, we've got to make sure that we've got a correct first aid provision, and that's paediatric first aid for children and first aid at work for adults. You need both provisions in your settings. And remember, paediatric first aid is every 3 years, the renewal is every 3 years, but EYFS recommends that you have an annual refresher. And again, please make sure that you're recording which staff and when they've attended that first aid refresher. I did mention earlier that we also say that the induction is part of the safer recruitment within a setting. It is mandatory. And within your induction, you have to carry out certain things. So you have to make sure that everybody knows who your DSL is, who your early years safeguarding lead is, what your child protection procedures are within school, offsetting, and what staff are required to do. They need to know those evacuation procedures, what to do if they're concerned about another adult in school, whether that be their behaviour towards a school or the behaviour towards arrangements within school. So that's coming back to that whistleblowing policy and making sure that's up to date and fully understood by everybody working with children. And of course, to do all this, we've got to make sure that everybody is appropriately trained. Gail mentioned about that whole setting, annual safeguarding and child protection awareness training. But remember, Keeping Children Safe in Education 2021 also says that everybody working with children must also have online safety awareness training because of those challenges that Gail alluded to earlier. And one of the big failures that we've found in safeguarding is that settings are not providing that effective safeguarding supervision. They are not providing the support, the coaching, the training that staff need. They need to be able to have an area where they can come to in a secure environment and be able to discuss any concerns they have around any safeguarding issues they may have in the setting. So lots going on in the induction as well. It's really important because coming back to our Ofsted, I know life isn't about Ofsted, but I'm afraid sometimes when I'm going into settings are doing all these things, but they're not evidencing it. Ofsted will require you to evidence it. They will check that you are able to produce evidence of the suitability of all the relevant staff and adults in your setting. And just coming back to what I said earlier, that includes volunteers, it includes governors, and you may have management committee members as well. So you've got to do safer recruitment checks around them. Now, Gail mentioned about the updated Keeping Children Safe in Education. The draft version came out around about the 28th of June. You may have downloaded that version, and that's fine. But please be aware it was updated on the 29th of July. So you need to download the latest version, which I will be sending out some information about this actually, which will give you the link to the latest version. It will be dated the 1st of September, and that is the latest version of Keeping Children Safe in Education. Now, this is a statutory document for schools and colleges. You must have regard to this. However, if you are an early years setting, it is best practice. You should have regard to this where you can, and we would highly recommend that you do that. There's some really good best practice in this document if you can abide to it. Certainly around part 3, which is your safer recruitment procedures. This, I said, the document's been increased to 160 odd pages. Part 3 has increased enormously because what it now does is it gives you that recruitment and selection process. It says what you should do right from advertising right through to what should be included in induction. And it's making it quite explicit. So it's a really useful document to make sure that you are carrying out all the checks that you are required to do. It also tells us about our pre-employment checks and our vetting checks. Now for schools, you must do those. So you must be going on to your TRA setting, your teacher regulation agency, and checking out those prohibition checks. However, for early years, you can't do that check, but you can do your bad list checks and things like that. It tells us what we must be recording. In fact, there's a brand new section in KC 2021 that tells us, as safeguarding leads, but also tells everybody working with children what they should be recording if they have got a concern about about a child in their care. And it also tells us our ongoing legal responsibilities. Now, we've looked at legal responsibilities about making a referral, a section 17, a section 47 down to our safeguarding partners. But don't forget about things like in early years, prevent duty, FGM. We still have got statutory duty around those. So this covers all that as well. Now, I have mentioned the DBS changes. I've just put up here the update service because I know many of practitioners within early years are requested to sign up for the update service, which is brilliant. But just a reminder, because I was doing a safeguarding training event yesterday, and I got a lot of questions around DBS certificates. What settings thought was, if somebody had subscribed to the update service, all the provider needed to do was go onto the update service, put in the details, and it says no change to the original DBS certificate. And they thought that was okay. It's not. We need to see the original certificate. If you cannot access, or they've lost their original certificate, we cannot accept that. We need to redo a DBS certificate for that person. Remember GDPR, for you to check anybody out on the update service, you do need to get consent from them because they can see who's checking them out. And in that Working Together to Safeguard Children update in December 2020, there were changes around this. Now, many of you will be aware of the DBS filtering changes that came in. And it's now the settings responsibility to ask the potential employee what cautions, convictions, etc. they have. We need to understand what those questions are. That came from Working Together to Safeguard Children. So if you've got somebody that is on the update service and their DBS certificate is identifying a caution or conviction that they had, and that now has been filtered since the 28th of November, we cannot take that into consideration. So as an employer, we need to know what has now been filtered and what hasn't. Big area around that. And as Gail said earlier, there's a whole training section around that. I mentioned that right to work check that has been updated. Can I please ask you to use this document? What I'm showing you on the screen now is the 1st of July document that has been updated. If you're using the previous Home Office documents, then you out of date. By using this document, and as an employer, you are protecting your statutory excuse. And therefore, if that person that you've employed hasn't got a right to work because they've been fraudulent and you hadn't picked it up, by using this document, you are protecting yourself. So I can't recommend this document enough. And you will see on there for all you people on here that are doing safe recruitment, look, that's new. A passport, we can now, right to work, we can now use a passport that is current or expired, which is something we weren't doing before, but there are other changes on that document as well. So please do download that latest version. And also, just finish on this, I did mention it, that the DBS filtering guidance that was updated on the 28th of November 2020. This is coming from, as you can see on there, that Rehabilitation of Offenders Act 1974. And any of you that has had safe recruitment training will know what that did. Basically, it was designed to give people with a criminal history a clean slate. What it said was, once that crime has been spent, the employer doesn't need to know about it anymore. But it came obvious quite quickly in 1975, should I say, that certain employers need to know about spent criminal convictions. And one of those employers is somebody working in education and working with children. So we brought in the Exemption Act in 1975. That plodded away nicely until 2013, which then changed the DBS filtering. And many of you who was around at that time will remember there was lots of different changes. On the 28th of November, it changed again. This is one of the biggest changes to DBS filtering since that 2013. And again, massive changes, but the main areas that you need to know about today's session is, if somebody previously to 28th of November had multiple convictions, they always showed on the DBS certificate, whether they've been filtered or not. Now, every conviction will be taken on its own merit, and the system will decide which is going to be filtered and which is going to be shown. So therefore, we might not have the full picture of that person's criminal history. The other thing that this is bringing in is that any convictions or cautions for juveniles, i.e. somebody under the age of 18, will be automatically filtered. So if it happened before the age of 18, they will be filtered when they reach the age of 18. So you will not see those on their DBS certificates. So again, we're not getting a full picture. of the history of that person. And the last thing that this has done, and if you haven't had this training, please do, at least one person on the recruitment panel, please do go on safer recruitment in education training. It says that as an employer now, you need to tell the prospective employee what they need to know about disclosing when they're applying for the role in your school. You need to tell them where to get their understanding of their rights and responsibilities, and you have to signpost them to where they can get independent advice. Lots going on there. So please, if you do need updates on that, then please do get somebody on safe recruitment training. And then that last thing is that staff induction. So we need to include this. We've looked at it. We're talking about those qualifications. We're talking about making sure that everybody working with children understands their roles and responsibilities. It's everyone's responsibility to safeguard children. We need to make sure that they're having training, they're fully skilled, and they have the knowledge to safeguard the children in their care. And they need to know about all those evacuation procedures, health and safety, first aid, and especially that effective supervision. So that's coming back to what I started with, your safer culture. No one person can safeguard children. It's only when we all work together. And safer culture has to incorporate your child protection procedures and your policies, your safeguarding suite of policies. It has to incorporate your recruitment and selection policies, making sure that you're recruiting the right people and making sure that they are suitable for working with children. It has to include your staff handbook or your code of conduct, which should include safer working practices and what expectations, behaviours we are requiring from our staff. And of course, it should include that induction and supervision process as well. So a lot going on there. And there might be lots for you to take away from here. So you might be thinking, oh, what are my priorities today? You will get copies of these slides. I've sent them over to Gail. So you will be getting copies of these slides. But just let me say a couple of other things. If you need any support from us, we are here to help you. We do all sorts of training online, on-site, and audits. But also what we're coming up very shortly is a brand new e-learning self-paced course, which means you can do early years safeguarding lead training at your own time, on a night, on a weekend, and you can do it in little chunks. That's coming very shortly. If you would like to express an interest in that course, then we're going to send you a link over. For expressing an interest, that's all you're doing. We will be sending you a 10% discount code. We will be sending you a safer recruitment checklist. I'll show you a picture of that. This is what it looks like, so that you can just look at your safer recruitment practices and make sure in each different area that you are complying to the legislation. And also, please don't hesitate to follow us on any of our social media channels. They're on the screen now. And again, if you express an interest in any of our services, we will subscribe you to our free safeguarding bulletin that goes out on a fortnightly basis. Okay, I'm at the end of today, so I'd just like to say thank you. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Yvonne. That was incredible. I think I'm sat here wondering how up to date we are on all of our policies. There seem to be so many changes all the time. And keeping on top of it, I'm sure is a mega challenge for everybody. I'm sure in your own practice, you must see that people struggle to keep on top of it all the time. Is there a central sort of newsletter that comes out which we could steer people to? I don't know, one produced by yourself or something?
Yeah, we do one. As I say, if you are expert, anybody can subscribe. Please just go onto our website under contact us and just subscribe. Ours comes out fortnightly on a Friday. And in that newsletter, what we do is we let you know if there's any major changes in legislation, any guidances. I often do free webinars like this, so we invite you to free webinars and training and resources and everything like that.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you. We've got very, very little time, but I've got about 6 or 7 questions. Don't worry, it was enthralling. 6 or 7 questions about frequency of DBS checks. People asking how often they should be undertaken. Can you shed some light on that for me, please?
Absolutely. If you, for existing DBS, for existing staff's DBS, there is no requirement to renew your DBS certificates unless you've got a concern about that member of staff, or that staff moves from a non-regulated activity into a regulated activity. Apart from those situations, then there is no requirement to renew a DBS.
Okay, good. Thank you. That was really clear. I think last question we're going to have time for then is a question from Magni, and she's asking, is it good practice to ask all staff to complete a self-declaration disclosure form on an annual basis?
Yeah, and again, it depends what you're asking them to disclose and what setting you are. What settings often do is every year you should be updating your staff handbook, your code of conduct. In there, there's often a final sheet that says that, that there's a declaration that says, I've read and understood this, this handbook, and I have no changes to the suitability for me working with children. They sign that, that's a declaration, that's what you would keep to evidence that you're asking that. If you are an early years setting and you're doing that declaration for disqualification under the Childcare Act, that needs to be done when people meet the criteria. And the criteria is 0 to 5, out of school provision up to the age of 8, and the management of that criteria. Good,
good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to wrap up. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been absolutely enthralling, and I'm sure we've all learned loads. It's been absolutely brilliant. Apologies to everybody who's asked questions we haven't had time to answer. If it's all right with you, Yvonne, we'll just ask you to answer them later on, and we'll put them in with everything that comes out to everybody later in the day. Thank you once again to Gail for talking earlier, and thank you everybody who's been joining us today.
Thank you.
Today's session, very, very valuable. I certainly learned loads. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Take care.